works, and plays in the great city of Oakland, California. She recently finished her term as a University of California student regent, during which she compiled and presented the first ever system-wide report on student food insecurity, as well as regional recommendations on healing malnourishment and hunger at the UC. Currently, she works at Icaso Consulting, a management consulting firm that develops organizational and procurement strategy for state governments and public sector organizations. This past year, she and her husband, Shahryar Abbasi, partnered to launch Empower, an organization that provides admissions consulting, academic enhancement, program design, and leadership development for students in an effort to help them achieve their goals. In her free time, she loves to explore artisanal ice cream flavors, hit the dance studio, and spend quality time with her siblings. And now, to break the double glass ceiling, Sadia Saifuddin.
Okay, so I actually want to start with a story. I was talking to a sister a couple weeks ago, and it was after an event at a masjid where we had a scholar come and talk about how to have a blissful marriage. So we had all these couples that come, and we're really excited to hear about how we can have a blissful marriage. And for the next 45 minutes to an hour, we heard about how it's the women's job to keep the peace in the house, and how men are always tired when they come home from work, and really it's always the women's job to do everything in the marriage. Who hasn't heard that before? I really think it was an issue of I think it was a disconnect of cultures, a disconnect of age, and geographic location. But after that, I was having a conversation with a sister, and she was prefacing everything that she was saying and a lot of her complaints with, I'm not a feminist, but I disagree with a lot of things that he was saying. And I was just wondering, why this need to disagree with feminism? So I think a lot of the times when we think about feminism, we think about this. And we think about how, feminism is this men-hating ideology where women are just trying to be complete and utter equals. It's about getting naked, and it's about having the freedom to be naked. And we don't really think about maybe some of the more complex issues surrounding feminism and what it means to be a Muslim specifically in that lens. Feminism actually looks a little bit more like this if you study feminist ideology. It is the right and the ability for all women to decide how to live their lives. So that means if a Muslim woman chooses to cover, she should be able to. And if a Muslim woman chooses not to, she should be able to. If a Muslim woman chooses to stay home and raise the kids, more power to her. And if she chooses to work, that's fine too. And there's a lot of complexities around this paradigm about thinking about feminism. So you ask, why do I bring up the F word in our conversation? I bring it up because there is a lot of conversation in spaces of power about what women's role is and how women are pushing the envelope and breaking the glass ceiling. But being a Muslim woman, it's not that simple. You don't just have one glass ceiling to break, you have multiple glass ceilings to break because, yeah, I hear that. Not only are you a woman and unfortunately get paid 70 cents to the dollar, to the man's dollar, but you're also a Muslim, and that comes with its own set of stereotypes and misconceptions about oppression and freedom and agency. And a lot of times those things are hard to break out of. So when you're a Muslim woman, what I find a lot of the times in my conversations with my fellow sisters is, it is so hard to be in public spaces and feel like I need to represent the entire Muslim ummah because there aren't that many women and there aren't that many Muslims in these type of spaces. And this is actually an issue I face as well too. And when we think of the sheer number of Muslims in the world, there's 1.7 billion. This is obviously a small microcosm of that, but that's very, very terrifying, and that's debilitating in a lot of ways. So then I was led to ask the question, how do you represent 1.7 billion people in the world? And after thinking about it and talking to a lot of my mentors about it, I realized that there was just one short answer: you don't. God doesn't ask us to represent every single Muslim that exists on this planet. He doesn't ask us to be this paradigm and this picture of perfection. He doesn't ask us to constantly bear the flag everywhere we go, because that's exhausting, and I know a lot of people have experienced that before. Allah only asks us to be the best version of ourselves, and He asks us to follow the ways of our Prophet ﷺ and follow his guidance that He has given us in the Quran. And yes, that is also very challenging, but it's definitely not the same thing as representing 1.7 billion people in the world. So I think there are a couple of questions that you should be asking yourself when you're thinking about how do I best represent myself and be the best version of myself that I can possibly be. The first question is, what runs in your blood? What family values do you come from? What's your family history? What do you wake up every morning thinking about, and what do you go to bed dreaming about? For me, it's food insecurity and higher education. Those things are really passionate. I'm really passionate about those things, and I'll talk a little bit about my journey through understanding what that meant to me. Also, what is a part of your legacy? What are things that your parents have passed down, your grandparents have passed down? A lot of us don't even take the time to talk to our grandparents and ask them about their times, their lives, what life was like back in the day, what they learned from growing up. And then, of course, how are you telling your story every day of your life? How are you telling the story of your history every day of your life? And arguably, this last one, it takes a lot of courage. The word courage actually comes from the Latin root cur, and that means how to tell your story in the most honest way possible. So that's not a coincidence. It's definitely something that's difficult to do. So I think I'll tell a little bit of my story. So all of my adult years have arguably been dedicated to student government and representation. I've dabbled in politics, not purposefully, but just I feel like I kind of ended up there. And I think that's something I thought a lot about, you know, in the past couple of years. I actually don't have that many adult years. I'm only 23, so let's be real with ourselves. But in the past couple of years, I realized that higher education ran in my blood. So both my grandmothers are teachers, or were teachers. My grandmother used to walk 3 miles to school and 3 miles back every day because they didn't have a car in Pakistan. My father actually came to the United States on this once-in-a-lifetime scholarship. He didn't mean to end up here. It was just kind of a fateful accident, I guess you can say, but there are no accidents in life. And he had to work multiple jobs to pay his international student tuition. And I think the thing that's the most heartbreaking about my father's story is that there was nobody there to watch him walk the stage when he graduated from college with honors because my grandparents couldn't afford to come to the United States. My father was working to pay not only his tuition, but send money home to my grandfather, who was a heart patient and would pass away a few years after that. So life was not easy, and because of that, that's something that I carry with me, and I think a lot about what my ancestors have given and the price they have paid for me to get here. So fast forward many years, I am at this point 19 or 20 years old. This is my sophomore year. I open my email, and I get this email from the financial aid office saying that I have zero financial aid available to me because my parents made slightly, like very slightly, like $1,000 above the amount that qualifies you for financial aid. Yay for public education. And I remember being so floored and completely freaked out and not really sure what I was going to do. My parents didn't want me to take any loans because they didn't want me to get stuck in that hole that is student debt, and I know a lot of you in the audience must know what that's like. And you know, I had a very real conversation with them, and they said, you know, we're going to try to do everything we can, but I think it's time for you to get a job and start contributing to the rent, to your education, to whatever you can. So I started working. I wasn't just working one job, I was working 3 jobs during the day. I was working over 21, 22 hours. That's the equivalent of a part-time job, and I was a full-time student at UC Berkeley. And I was tutoring in the evenings. And I remember just running from class to work and back and getting really poor grades just because I didn't have the time, the energy to really put into my classes. So what ends up happening later is, you know, a few of my friends approached me about thinking for running for Senate. You know, it took a little bit of convincing, but I did that. I really loved it. And the year after that, I started working for the student regent designate. His name was Jonathan Stein. He's still one of my mentors today. And after I finished my term as a student, as a senator, he said, you know, Sadia, you'd be really good at this job. Why don't you apply? But remember, it's really hard to get it. It's mainly grad students. It's been grad students for the past 10 years. The resumes are just a lot heftier than undergrads, but why don't you go ahead and give it a shot, see what happens. So I gave it a shot, and this happened. So I encourage you to read the highlight, but if for those of you sitting far away, I'll read it for you. Saifuddin is a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood Front Group. Muslim Student Association, MSA, and Students for Justice in Palestine. The last two, not so bad, but the first one was, okay, come on. And I was like, I started getting hate mail, I started getting threatening phone calls, I started having people stop me on the streets, I started having reporters call me and TV stations wanting to cover it. And not all of the attention was very positive. Some of it was really, really difficult. As you can see, there were petitions out to prevent the Regents from, letting me be on the board. And I had to face a ton of headlines. These are all real headlines that I had to deal with. Some of them are really great. Some of them are very difficult. But I think my favorite one is this one. Islamic supremacists nominated as UC Student Regent. I have to give them credit. They all chose very flattering pictures of me. So, I guess I have to give them I definitely have to thank them for that. But I think there are a lot of things that I learned as I was going through this process about what it means to come in not just as a minority, but just to come in at a very big disadvantage. I remember my first meeting, I had a Regent ask me, she took me aside and quietly she said, I just need to know, what's your agenda? Do you have an agenda? And I swear to God, this is the most racist thing anybody has ever asked me before. Frankly, I didn't know what to say in the moment, so I stopped for a second and I thought about the best way to respond, and I said, I do have an agenda. My agenda is to make sure students are fed and they're housed and they don't have to pay exorbitant amounts for education and that public education stays affordable. That's why I'm here. And I don't think she was expecting that response. I think she was expecting me to say like, oh, you caught me. But it is what it is. So I kind of want to share a couple of the tips that I learned for any of you that are interested in working in spaces of politics or power. It could be in the classroom, it could be in the boardroom. These are just things that I learned through my own experiences that I'd want to share with you. So the first tip is work through your discomfort. Anything worth having is not going to be comfortable. Anything worth having is not going to be easy. And you will be in spaces in which you feel like you do not belong. And that's a really difficult thing to feel. It's a lot easier to withdraw and say, this is not my thing, I'm just gonna find something else to do. But if you wanna make an impact, you have to work through those feelings and tell yourself every day, you do belong here. Because you wouldn't be here if God hadn't written for you to be here. So keep that in mind. Don't question God's plan for you. He has a plan for you. My second tip is prepare for everything. Never walk into a meeting without researching who you're going to be meeting with, without looking up every article you can find, run a background check on that person. Find out what it is that interests them, what it is that is disinteresting to them. Find out, what you want, what they're good at, what they can provide for you. And this is not, I'm not encouraging you to use people. That's not what I'm saying. But if you want to be successful, you're going to have to make sure you come prepared to every single meeting and know exactly what you're getting yourself into. My third tip actually is know what outcomes you seek. So don't just go into a meeting saying, oh great, I'm just gonna go into this meeting and see how it goes. You wanna go into any interaction with anyone knowing exactly what you want at the end of the conversation. And you wanna walk away getting that at the end of the conversation. And it's hard, it's hard to get to that point, but if you wanna be an effective leader and if you want to be taken seriously, you have to know what it is that you want before you're able to set up your plan for the future. My fourth tip is learn when and how to speak. People think that just because you have a podium, you can just go on and on and on and just blabber away. But trust me, at some point, people will lose interest and people will stop taking you seriously. So you don't have to speak at every single item on the agenda, right? Like if they're talking about something totally irrelevant to you, about funding to build like a random bridge on a random campus, and you're like, actually this is a problem, you can't do that, because at some point people are just gonna think that you're a talking head that wants any opportunity to be the center of attention. But if you're strategic about the words that you use and when you speak, every single head will be turned toward you, because what you have to say is always impactful. My fifth tip is be 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Don't be 1 step ahead, don't be 2 steps ahead, be 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And the reason I say this is because if we want to get anywhere as a Muslim community, we need to be visionaries, and we need to be able to envision where exactly we want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Same goes for any interaction that you have, right? So if you go into a conversation, you need to be able to at least imagine what the person will throw back at you so you can be better prepared in that conversation. Now say you go in, you have a great plan, and you propose it to a superior or another regent or another political player, you know, in the room, and then they come back with some kind of like argument against it, or they come back, you know, with an issue that maybe you didn't think about. You're not going to have anything to say, and that's going to poke holes in your great plan. So be able to look at a problem or an issue from all sides, full 360-degree vision, so that you're able to be ahead of the curve. My second to last tip is you will always meet resistance. You know, our Muslim community, it's not that we haven't been established for that long. Like, we have been around for a while, but I think post 9/11 is really when we started making waves. And I think it's always hard as Muslims when we go into these spaces, because in politics, it's really easy to assign blame, right? That's what our political scene is about. It's just, you know, so-and-so did this, you know, the recession is so-and-so's fault. Like, everyone is just pointing fingers at each other. And actually, if you study what blame is in research, blame is a way of discharging pain and discomfort. So when people are doing that in the political realm, they're just discharging their own pain. So remember that when you as a Muslim come in with your values, with your integrity, with your confidence and your passion, it holds a mirror against your opponent's face. And people are forced to confront an ugly reality sometimes. And that makes them uncomfortable. So you will always face resistance and pushback, but remember that if you have haters, you're on the right path. Actually, this is my second to last tip. I got a lot of tips for you guys. People notice presence, passion, and confidence the most. So if you're pursuing something but your heart's not in it, trust me, everyone will be able to tell. But if you are present in the moment, whether you are speaking, whether you are presenting, whether you are having an individual interaction with someone, they can tell, and they're going to remember that forever, and they're going to know that you are an impactful person. Be passionate. Whatever it is that you wake up thinking about, whatever it is that keeps you up at night, that's what you should be pursuing. For me, like I said, that's food insecurity. I worked to establish UC Berkeley's food pantry. I worked on developing system-wide recommendations to solve food insecurity in the UC. About 1 in 5 students is food insecure at the University of California. You would think it would be lower given that we're paying crazy amounts of tuition, but it's not the case, unfortunately. And my last tip is, don't fake it till you make it. Fake it until you become it. And I want to put this out there for everyone, but especially women, because as women, it's really easy to feel like you don't belong. I think I was one of like 3 or 4 women on the board. And a lot of times in these spaces, you really feel like you're not supposed to be here. And it's really easy to let that shut you up and shut you down. And I remember when I was a freshman or sophomore, I would talk to my friends, and anytime they would be having a hard time or they'd be worried about something, I would just tell them, fake it till you make it. You'll get done, don't worry. But as I've grown, I realized that the more you do something, the better you become at it. And the more heart you give to something, the more you get good at it as well. So do something, do whatever it is that scares you, and do it so often that you become that you embody that, and that you become someone that other people can draw light and passion and confidence from as well. Thank you.